a great point, Dan, where you look at TCU. I think there's going to be a lot of buzz just in terms of where they're coming off of, but that's a great point. And I think the biggest key for them, they're going to be without their quarterback in Max Duggan, who declared for the NFL draft. That's a huge hit for them. The problem is Houston's kind of in a similar situation. So absolutely, that's the biggest question mark for the Cougars. They only play two non-conference games before they start their conference slate portion. In terms of Houston, they're going to play UTSA, which we saw this time. It'll be at TDCU Stadium. It won't be in San Antonio, but we saw how crazy of a game it was last year in the Alamo Dome. And they're going to be returning their quarterback. So they're going to be ready. They're going to be amped up because that's going to be their first year in the American Athletic Conference. And then they play Rice week 2, who, again, the Owls are kind of slowly building something. They're also going to be the first year in the American Athletic Conference, and they gave Houston a lot of troubles at home this past season before they play TCU, and then they have a bit of an interesting quirk. They play TCU, then they play their final non-conference game of the season against Sam Houston on September 23rd before having to play Texas Tech to end the month of September. But kind of focusing on those two non-conference games real quickly, how much of that, and the answer should be, this is tricky because in a normal year, you'd think that depending on how Houston looks in those two games against UTSA and Rice, it would determine how much buzz there is. It's a bit of an interesting where regardless of what happens, I feel like there's going to be some initial buzz for that September 16th game against TCU because that's the first time we're ever playing a Big 12 opponent as a member of the Big 12. But if they kind of look bad against UTSA and Rice, that might put a huge damper on the first Big 12 conference schedule ever for the Houston Cougars.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. Look bad. I think if it's a bad loss, well, I think if you lose the either one of those first two matchups, it's going to temper down the expectations for the fans even more going into the Big 12. But I think if you get close wins against UTSA or Rice, the expectation, well, I want to say the expectation, the excitement will still be there opening the Big 12. But I think you must handle business, starting with UTSA. I mean, they returned their quarterback who is really, really good, and they have a lot of skill position. They're a program that's on the rise in Texas, so they're able to keep a lot of this Texas football talent in the state of Texas as well. And they're looking to prove themselves going into the American, just like Rice is. Rice looking to get off the snide where Houston has pretty much dominated that matchup. And so there's two teams who are going to be hungry to prove themselves against Houston. But Houston, I mean, has to be in a great position right now. I mean, going into the Big 12, finally, you're in the city of Houston where you're able to recruit not only the city, but the entire state of Texas. And now you don't have to deal with you're not in a major conference anymore. I think that's why Houston is now continue to get so many big recruits going out of high school and transfers coming in. I think you're able to sell, hey, be a part of us turning this thing around, and you can actually build your name here and build a legacy here. And so you definitely have to take care of business those first two matchups. You can't look forward until the Big 12 skills. You got to be where your feet are and take care of business day in and day out.
Absolutely, and kind of similar to this season, those two schools are going to be gunning for Houston coming out the stretch because they are essentially they're two schools that are going in to replace the Cougars who left the American Athletic Conference. So I'm sure they're going to be amped up, especially like you said, UTSA is going to be looking to get payback from the loss that they suffered at the hands of Houston in the Alamo Dome just a season ago. And hopefully it's two games that the Houston Cougars are able to come out on the winning side of. But I think that first game of the season against UTSA will be really tough because regardless of who's under center for the Houston Cougars at quarterback is going to be someone that's new. They're inexperienced, certainly under the Dana Holgorsen system. So not to tamper down expectations, there's still a lot of excitement, but that's going to be a big game, and hopefully it's not to a point where there's a lot of it's kind of like a balloon where it ends up being deflated going into that first matchup against TCU. Now,
I think let me add something real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick before you go on. I think the quarterback, whoever it be, whether it be Donovan Smith, whether it be Lucas Coley, whether it be someone else whom we don't know yet, I think they'll be in a good position because they're going to have talent all around them, really starting in the backfield or really starting up front with an experienced O-line who played well. And I think they're returning all of their offensive linemen, if I'm not mistaken. But they got their a lot of talent. And starting in the backfield with Alton McCaskill coming back. Still got Brandon Campbell, and you still got Snead, and then you go outside with all the weapons with Golden, You got Manjack, you got Brown, you got all the transfer attempts you got coming in, and so I think the quarterback will probably be in a position to where early on they can manage the game and allow the running game and quick passing game to kind of help ease them into the season. But who knows, man? You got to get out to a good start with the way the Houston fans um, kind of fickle in as far as attending games and supporting.
Yeah. So biggest question, and this just popped in my head because you said about the fan base. What do you expect the crowd to be for that October 21 matchup between Houston and Texas at TDU Stadium? Because I was talking, not to plug in another show that we're part of, Folks Talking Sports with Chris Gardner, friend of the show from the Houston Roundball Review, and Will Gibson, who's one of the other co-hosts that helps us do the show on Folks Talking Sports. But they feel like it'll be 60-40 Texas fans inside the TDECU Stadium. They expect a lot of burnt orange, and that's being kind of generous inside TDECU Stadium. I don't think that's the case, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I think Houston fans is going to have so much pride in regards to playing Texas. I say it's probably be 70-30. I think it will be a large amount of burnt orange, a large amount of Texas, because you think about Houston, a lot of people who went to Texas probably live in Houston. And so I think they will come out and support. I think Houston fans is going to dominate that stadium in regards to numbers and really come out and show support. And I probably go 70-30, 70% Houston fans, 30% Texas fans. But I expect a large draw from Texas fans. And if Houston fans don't show up and Houston maybe loses a couple games or whatever the case may be, and then I can see Texas fans outnumbering Houston fans because they're going to travel and they're going to support Texas regardless of where they are. And so if Houston fans don't come out, then I can agree with Chris and you guys on Folks Talking Sports that Texas fans will outnumber Houston fans. But I'm gonna give Houston fans some credit. Well, not credit. I'm gonna give them some slack right here. I think they will come out just for a pride aspect of being from Houston and not allow Texas fans to outnumber them in their home stadium. In the
I
first time,
hope
like you
so.
mentioned, what 20
Yeah.
years?
Yeah, by then it will have been over 20 years since the last time that they played UT at all. And uh, I hope that Houston fans, even if they're winless at that point, I don't care if they're winless. They play 9 conference games, even if they go 1-8. It's Texas. That's the Lakers Celtics rival right there, and you haven't seen
Yeah.
them in forever. Houston fans
It's
need to
like
show
Lakers
out.
Clippers.
Well, I guess that's probably you're right in that aspect if we're being objective about it in terms of
Yeah.
the rival. If we're looking
Yeah.
at it from the Austin
I
perspective,
agree.
that is how they view us. They view us as the
Yeah.
Clippers, they're the Los Angeles Lakers. But guess what? The Houston Cougars better put out and show out for that game.
Yeah.
And even if you go 1-8 in conference, that one win has to be against Texas. You have to get
Against
up for
Texas.
that game. Ruin
I
their
agree.
season at one point. Don't let them get into the CFP playoff. They're leaving the conference. This might be the last time that you play the Texas Longhorns in a while again, anyways, because nothing's guaranteed past this season. You got to show out. In the home game of all things, do not get outnumbered by Texas fans. Please, I'm begging you guys, do not get outnumbered by Texas fans at TDECU Stadium. That game will be at TDECU Stadium. It's not moving to NRG Stadium, so that's another big gap for the Houston Cougars as well. As
I
we
think
wrap this up,
Houston. Before
go
we
ahead.
wrap up, I think the student section is going to be crazy. I think
Oh,
the
absolutely.
students are going to be electric, and if anything, Houston probably has to uncap the number of student tickets that they can allow students to get in as many
Yeah.
as they can to fill as much stadium. But I agree with you 100%.
Season ticket holders, do not sell your tickets for that game. Show out. Show out to that game. Do not sell them. Don't make a profit off of it. Attend the game. This is going to be one of the last times that you probably get to see Texas, certainly at TDCU Stadium. So you got to get up and show out for that game now. What I was going to say, the last interstate rival that's left on schedule, Baylor, they have to travel up to Waco. That's kind of interesting because the year of the COVID year, Houston was actually scheduled to go and travel up to Waco to play Baylor. I still have somewhere up there. I have a whole bunch of list of credentials right here. I have the credential that was supposed to be for that Baylor game in 2020. Of course, we know, I think Baylor was the one that had the COVID issues. That game got postponed. Dana Holgerson was not happy about it because it literally happened less than 24 hours before the game was supposed to start. Baylor, since then, has been able to establish themselves as a consistent powerhouse in football. They've been able to establish a good program, and it seems like they're always towards the top of the Big 12 conference year in and year out, regardless of what their roster turnover looks like. So that's going to be a tough game on the road in that environment that Houston's going to have to go through in the Big 12 schedule.
Yeah, another consistent program since they got their new head coach since he's doing an outstanding job. But I think that's a key game, an important game, just like Texas and TCU. I think that's another matchup there. Not only Baylor fans but Houston fans have circled. And I expect that game to be a highly. I think Baylor's going to be one of the rivals for Houston.
Yeah,
Um, I
especially once
expect
Texas
Baylor.
and OU move on.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so that's another key game on the road. I mean, Houston, they're gonna have their work cut out for them. It's gonna be tough. I mean, but this is what you asked for. You asked to be in a bigger conference, better competition. Now it's time to perform and show who you are.
You sound like Dana Holgerson for a second. That's what they asked for. It's gonna be a tough. It's gonna be a tough schedule every week, every night out, especially every week out when you look at it. But I think there's just so much more excitement when you look at it. No offense to the American Athletic Conference because did have exciting matches, but it was just hard to get up at times for Temples, for USF, for games like that. I mean, even Tulsa, even though give credit to the Golden Hurricane, they came in here, they beat the Houston Cougars on the last game of the season, which Houston already had a long shot at being able to make the American Athletic Conference Championship game, but there just wasn't no buzz or excitement for any of those matchups. And now when you look at the schedule, every opponent, a lot of it has to do with how regionalized the opponents are. But it's easy. I'm looking at it top to bottom. TCU, Texas Tech, I mean, West Virginia, it'll be interesting to see how that rolls out. But even Texas, Baylor, like those games are going to be, there's a lot of excitement just because of where they are, how close they are. And again, how you said, there's a lot of alumni from those universities that probably reside within the city of Houston. So it'll make for a good atmosphere. Now, before I touch on Cincinnati and UCF, who Houston's going to play both of them, and of course they're joining Houston from the American Athletic Conference as well. Oklahoma State, kind of a bit of an underrated team that you mentioned, kind of the Lakers and Clippers rivalry from a Houston, Texas standpoint. They're not going to play Oklahoma, but they are going to play Oklahoma State, which, at times they've shown that they can be, again, they can make a run in the Big 12 conference. So it'll be interesting latter end of the season. So by then we'll know whether it's a good year or not for the Cowboys. But that could be another interesting matchup, and that's going to be a home game. That's actually the last home game of the year for the Houston Cougars. So a good opponent to close out the home schedule with.
For sure, they're another consistent program in the Big 12, and they always start hot. Every year they start hot, and so it's about for them. It's about finishing, and for Houston, I think it's good because Oklahoma State team is another school that recruits focus in tech, where their recruiting base is based in Texas. So not
Yeah.
only does Houston want to win the game to win, but also you want to protect the home state and allow, like, hey, don't go out there when you can come and play here. But Oklahoma State is going through some transition. They lost I think the 2 or 3 year starter Spencer Sanders is transferred to Ole Miss, so they have a little bit of transition going there. But regardless, they put out good quarterbacks year in year out in that system,
Yeah.
and so that's going to be a highly competitive game to close out the season. And hopefully, Houston is playing for something, and hopefully Oklahoma State is playing for something as well. And so I can't wait for that one. Oklahoma State is a good football program for sure.
Yeah, once again, that's going to be the last home game of the schedule for the Houston Cougars. They play Oklahoma. They host Oklahoma State on November 18th. Now, the week before that, they will also host Cincinnati. That'll be November 11th. And then they end the season on the road against UCF on November 25th. So Cincinnati and UCF, those two obviously are programs that are joining Houston from the American Athletic Conference. I think it's interesting when you look at the Bearcats. They're in a completely rebuild phase after losing their head coach in Luke Fickell. Obviously, they had already lost their quarterback Desmond Ritter this past year to the professional ranks. He went to the NFL. Now without their head coach joining a new conference, they're kind of in a tough spot heading into the Big 12.
They're definitely in a tough spot. And a year ago, before he left, we were looking at this program was extending and going to the Big 12. Now it's kind of an uncertainty as far as what you lose your head coach, and often a lot of players kind of transfer out once they get in the new coaching staff. So, I mean, I guess we kind of got to wait to see where Cincinnati is. But regardless, I think that's a program. While Houston's been an American, they kind of built a rivalry, specifically in basketball, and with the way they've had success in football. It's kind of been kind of one of the top teams since Houston had to compete against in regards to winning a conference championship. And so I'm gonna be looking to see how Cincinnati actually bounces back and how they look going into the Big 12.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that hasn't helped really for that rivalry to blossom in football is that they just haven't been scheduled to play against each other during the last few years. I think the last time they played in the regular season, I believe it was the 2020 season when they played Cincinnati. And I might be wrong about that. I know they played in 2019 for sure, and then of course they met in the 2021 American Athletic Championship game where, I mean, in the first half Houston was neck and neck with the Bearcats, and then they just took over. In the second half of the year, they went on to the college football playoff. Now, UCF, last team from the American Athletic Conference that also will be joining Houston. What are your thoughts on them? Because that's going to be the year that's going to be the opponent they close out the first year in the Big 12 with. What are your thoughts on the Knights? Because again, they've kind of been able to establish themselves. I know it's the American Athletic Conference; it's different, but they've kind of established themselves toward the top of the conference throughout their entire time in the AAC.
One thing is common with Houston is some of these programs, it's history there. And so not only do they have history, UCF, because of the Americans, it's history between the two coaches, with Malson and Hogerson. So they both know each other really well. And so from that perspective, I think the narrative is going to be between the two coaches and the history that they have, um, culture with one another and learning from one another. And so for UCF, I think they're a little bit established. I don't want to say more established. I probably put it on an equal playing field in regards to Houston heading into the Big 12, but they had a bounce back successful season compared to they had the year before. And so I know they're going to be just like Houston, looking to prove that they belong in the Big 12 and they can play and win. And so that's going to be a game that I know that they're going to want to win as well.